3 students in one high school in Florida are facing a 10-day suspension after they showed up to class wearing KKK garb. Now, the Wiregrass Ranch High School students were seen wearing white pointed hoods. Eyeholes were cut from the hoods, drawing an unmistakable comparison to the infamous White Knights. Officials do say that 2 of the students in these questionable outfits were Hispanic and 1 was Middle Eastern. So they weren't white, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to be white to do something super offensive and racist. So again, these are high school students. These are not 85-year-olds or 90-year-olds that look back at the days of, segregation and wish they can go back to the good old days. These are kids, essentially, that think it's acceptable to wear KKK garb on their campus.
Yeah, I'm a little torn on this because kids are stupid. And we make the mistake of treating them both too lightly and too seriously. I'm kidding around about kids being stupid. A lot of times if you talk to them like adults, even really young kids, you'll be shocked at how well they respond. But at the same time, when they're teenagers, and I know because when I was a teenager, I did a lot of things that were not bright, right? You got a lot of hormones going and you think everything is funny and you think, farts are the funniest things you've ever heard. And it's, well, a little younger than teenager, I hope. But anyway, and so I don't know if they were trying to be ghosts. I don't know if they meant to do the Klan thing or if they're like using the ghost thing as an excuse and they think it's really funny to be in a Klan outfit. Mm-hmm. And so this bothers me less than a grown-ass man who's running for political office, who demonizes others, etc. But at the same time, you don't want to say, it's no big deal, because then it grows.
No,
right?
I think it's a huge deal, okay? And it bothers me just as much as, Donald Trump's bigotry and racism bothers me. And the reason why is because I hold younger people to a much higher standard when it comes to racism. I do, because we have moved forward in the country in some regard when it comes to race relations. And I feel like, the one bit of hope I have left when it comes to discrimination and doing something about it is that these old racist fuddy-duddies are a dying breed, literally, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that younger people are more open-minded. I think that they're more tolerant. I think they're more accepting. And I think that they're smarter. I think they're smarter when it comes to race relations. And then when you see something like this, I'm not going to make excuses for it. I'm not going to say, oh, you're just a minor, so you don't know what you're doing. No, you're in high school. You know what you're doing. Okay? Mm-hmm. If you think 16-year-olds are old enough to decide whether or not it's right for them to have sex, I think that they're old enough to decide whether or not it's acceptable to wear KKK garb on campus.
Yeah. And so even if you think it's a joke, you got to understand at some point that your joke really bothers other people because it makes them feel unsafe, uncomfortable. And so I guess where I take it a little bit easier on them is that they haven't had time to study all the history, so they think it's like they're
in high school.
They're in
high school.
But
no, it's Florida, okay? I'm going to keep it 100. It's Florida. No, it's Florida, okay?
It's Florida.
The mentality, the ideology, the thought process toward black people in Florida is different. It just is.
Yeah, I hear you. And certainly big parts of Florida have a Southern mentality, which then leads me to my point. First of all, I like that you hold millennials to a higher standard because you respect them more. So that's a point really well taken, Anna. But overall here, the reason why it still exists is because history rains down on us through the generations. These kids got it from somewhere, and they got it from home. So they got it from the old fuddy-duddies who pass it on to their kids, who've now passed it on to their kids. And so people think, oh, Cenk, don't talk about slavery, don't talk about Jim Crow, don't talk about the civil rights era. We're done with that.
No, we're not done with it.
But that's the problem. We're not done with it because that culture keeps getting passed on down. Now, it gets passed down, but it gets, met with a counterculture, which the right wing dislikes, of equality and actually
terrible.
And where we all
treating
have
people like human beings.
Yeah, where we all have the same rights and we all respect one another. And so I think we're winning that battle. But yes, you do have these throwbacks sometimes. And that's why we have to keep pointing it out so that
there are black students on that campus, right? And so if I were black and I have my students going to that campus and there are other students showing up looking like that, you better believe that I'd have a tough time containing my temper, okay? That is unacceptable behavior. I don't care if you think it's a joke. And a 10-day suspension, if you ask me, is also a joke. I think that a 10-day suspension teaches them nothing. I think more importantly, there needs to be, they need to amp up their education there and their history lessons there to kind of explain what the differences are between the black community and the white community. And I'm not talking about their inherent differences. I'm talking about the system that we have in place that holds a certain community down and helps another community. But by the way, another quick thing that I wanted to add. Look, this story strikes a nerve with me, especially right now, because just last night I got into a debate about racism, right? And so the argument was, someone said to me, and you can imagine that it really upset me, like someone was making excuses about slavery, right? And then the argument went to, the inherent nature of black people. They're inherently defiant, this person said. They're inherently, what do you say when you disagree or you argue with one another? You don't follow laws. Not confrontational. You're prone to never following the law. Okay, something like that. But anyway, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I realize that person isn't necessarily a bad person. They're just misinformed because they think that black and white people have an equal footing in the country, and they've had an equal footing since the beginning, which they haven't. Right? They don't know much about institutionalized racism. They don't know too much about how blacks get targeted for the exact same crimes that whites commit 4 times more. That's the marijuana statistic that we mention all the time. They don't know about the discrimination they face if they have a black-sounding name. So all of these, systemic things that are happening that lead to them being held down. And it's just, there needs to be more education about these things within our schools. There can't be like this excuse of, oh, they're just kids, so whatever.
So let me tell you about where those stereotypes come from. So black people are defiant. Now, this stuff, again, it rains down on us through the generations, and it's cultural, and they're tricky, and you got to watch them, and they're prone to stealing things, etc. These are all stereotypes from the past. Why? Okay, it's interesting. I'm just reading about this in of all places, Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath. That culture existed because they were slaves, and so if you were a slave, what would you be? Would you be defiant? Or would you be compliant? And would you think that being compliant is something that you should get a lot of credit for if you're a slave? Or would you give more credit if somebody was defiant? And so the slave owners would get really mad at the slaves if they stole some crops or they didn't work really hard. And they say, oh, blacks are lazy. They say, and they steal. You stole their whole lives. And you're worried that in the midst of you stealing their humanity and their lives, and sometimes their wives and sometimes their kids, they stole a tomato here or there, and they're the bad guys, right? And then you talk about how they would be up to no good. Well, what did you want them to do? You're up to no good. For hundreds of years, you did this, right? So now I'm not saying that white people are responsible for it now. I want you to understand that context as to why the stereotypes exist in the first place. So, and then to turn around and blame black people, like they say, the last one, lazy. Did you want the slaves to work hard? For what reason? If you were a slave, would you have worked hard? For why? You get none of it. You get none of it. You are forced to do that work. And on top of them, you want them to be industrious and work hard so that you make more and they continue to make nothing, let alone all the things that could happen to them, right? So this is the culture that began. Now, luckily, we have really chipped away at a lot of it, but it's still here. And so it's whittled down, but there is still that culture of blacks are like this and blacks are like that, and it is massively infuriating. So the main part that I agree with you on, Anna, is when this happens at a school, it is literally a teachable moment. So what you do is you sit down those guys and everybody else, and we have a super uncomfortable lesson on lynchings. Now, when we talk about lynchings, our videos get banned, okay? Not banned like they're taken off, but like, whoa, you can't watch this if you're young, you can't watch this if you're this or if you're... They get flagged, right? Why? Because it makes people uncomfortable. But you have to understand history as to why it might not be such a good idea to wear a Klan robe to a school where there's black kids. So I'm going to say it again, and I know it makes people uncomfortable, so I'm giving you a warning. What happened in lynchings is they would grab the black person who 9 out of 10 times did absolutely nothing wrong. They looked at a white girl the wrong way. 1 out of 10 times, what did they do? They did 1% of what the slave owner did. They took a tomato, and when the slave owner took their whole lives, but good enough, no, we're going to lynch them. They would hang them. They would burn them. They would make a picnic around it. They would bring the kids, and then they would take parts of the burned body home as souvenirs. And I'm not even going to tell you what they did to the genitalia. So then don't go around telling me that black people are lazy or that they take things. You don't get to say that. So learn your history, learn what happened, so that we don't have stuff like this happening again. At the Young Turks, we believe in change. We believe we can change the media, make it more independent. Come do it with us. tytnetwork.com/join.